Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Derek was always a passionate man, truly in love with Vanessa. From the first glance, he knew he would do anything to win her over. And he did. He fought, persisted, showed who he was, proved that he wasn't there for flings but to build an entire life with her. Years later, married with 2 children whom he loved deeply, he still had that same sparkle in his eyes every time he spoke of her, as if time hadn't passed. Every wedding anniversary was celebrated with lots of love, gifts, surprises, and sincere declarations. For Derek, family was always the most precious thing he possessed. And it was precisely because of this that, on that day, he decided to do something special. The plan was simple but full of meaning. He left work early, stopped by her favorite flower shop, and picked out a bouquet that he knew would make her smile. Then he went to a store and bought a piece of jewelry he'd been eyeing for weeks, something he knew she would really like. He grabbed a bottle of wine, stopped at the bakery, and picked out the cake they always bought on special occasions. In his mind, everything would be perfect. He would arrive home as a surprise, hug her, tell her how much he loved her and how she was the best thing that ever happened to him. Then they'd celebrate another year of marriage, just as they always did. As he drove back home, his heart raced, not from suspicion, but from good anticipation, that feeling you get when you're about to make someone happy. All he could think about was her reaction, her smile, the embrace, the kiss, and the kids' joy upon seeing their parents celebrating another year of marriage. He truly believed his life was a happy one, a blessed one, built on love, respect, and companionship. He planned the surprise while the kids were still at school, so it would be just the 2 of them. When he parked in the garage, he noticed the front door was slightly ajar. It seemed strange, but he didn't suspect anything. He gathered the bags, adjusted the flowers, and opened the door with that silly grin on his face, the kind you have when you're about to surprise someone you love. What happened in the next few seconds was something he never, in his entire life, imagined he would experience. As soon as he took 2 steps inside the house, he heard a muffled sound coming from upstairs. At first, he thought it was the TV, but he quickly realized it wasn't. With each step he took, the sounds became clearer, sharper, until, not wanting to believe what he was about to see, he climbed the stairs. His heart started pounding. His hands sweated. His whole body trembled, and for some reason he couldn't explain, he kept walking. He reached the bedroom door and, when he pushed it open, the world simply stopped. Before his eyes was the scene he never imagined witnessing. Vanessa, his wife, the woman he loved so much, was there, on the bed they had shared for 19 years, under the sheets they had chosen together, on the pillows where they had fallen asleep in each other's arms countless times, with another man. A man he didn't even know. And it wasn't a mistake, it wasn't an embrace, it wasn't a misinterpreted situation. It was exactly what it looked like. 2 bodies intertwined, without any concern, without any guilt, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. Derek froze. The flowers slipped from his hand, the bag with the gift fell to the floor, and the sound of the wine bottle shattering echoed in slow motion in his head. No words came out of his mouth. No scream, no questions, not even a sound. Just silence. Silence accompanied by a million thoughts exploding in his mind. How? Why? Since when? And above all, how could she do this after everything they had been through together? The evidence was right there before his eyes, and when Vanessa saw him, she panicked, pulling the sheet to cover herself, her eyes wide, unable to say anything. The man, pale and trembling with fear, stumbled out while trying to hurriedly put his clothes on. Derek began shouting, overcome with fury and pain, while the guy simply ran out of the house, fleeing without looking back. Vanessa, completely in panic, collapsed on the floor, clutching the sheet against her body and crying without being able to say a word, begging, sobbing, trying to justify herself amidst her own despair. Derek took a step back, his head throbbing, his chest feeling like it was about to burst from the pain. He went down the stairs with wobbly legs, opened the door, and got into the car, unsure of what to do or where to go. He only knew he couldn't stay there anymore. His vision seemed blurry, and the tears began to fall, first timidly, then uncontrollably, along with a suffocating mix of anger, anguish, and disbelief. His heart felt crushed, as if someone had squeezed it until nothing but pain remained. Derek drove aimlessly, lost, his mind racing, trying to understand how this was happening. He drove around the city for about half an hour, unsure whether to cry, scream, or just disappear. But the more he thought about it, the angrier he became. The pain made way for the need for answers. He needed to understand. He needed to hear from her why. He needed to know since when, who that guy was, and what led her to do something so cruel after nearly 20 years together. Without even realizing it, he was already heading back home. He stopped the car, took a deep breath, and went in. Vanessa was sitting on the couch, curled up, crying, her face red, and her hands shaking. As soon as she saw him, she tried to explain, but Derek wouldn't let her. He went straight to the point, his voice firm and charged with anger, asking, "Since when? Who is that guy? Why did you do this to me? Why did you do this to our family?" She, completely disoriented, stuttered, said she didn't know, that it was a mistake, that she was confused, that it didn't mean anything. Empty excuses, illogical, meaningless. Avoiding any concrete answer, she avoided eye contact, tried to justify herself, but only made things worse. Derek clenched his fists, trying to control himself, trying not to completely lose his mind. It felt like he was talking to a stranger, someone he never imagined knowing. After a few minutes, he realized there was no point in staying there anymore. She didn't have the courage to admit anything, nor to tell the truth. That was the last straw. Without saying another word, he went upstairs, grabbed a suitcase, threw in some clothes, documents, whatever he saw, and came back down. He passed through the living room, looked at her one last time, and with a choked voice, simply said, "I'm leaving. Today. And I'm not coming back." He left, slammed the door, and at that moment, the only certainty he had was that that house would never be his home again. And that woman would never again be part of his life. Derek woke up on the couch at his friend Mark's house. His head throbbed, his whole body felt crushed. He barely managed to sleep, and in the few hours when sleep came, he only relived that cruel scene repeatedly. The more he thought about it, the more impossible it seemed to believe that all of this was real. What had he done to deserve this? How could someone he dedicated practically half his life to destroy everything so cowardly? He tried, in every way, to find answers within himself, but none of them made sense. And if that wasn't bad enough already, it got even worse when he realized he had to face another pain, the absence of his children. For the first time in his life, he woke up without hearing Megan calling for her dad, or Blake running around the house asking for help with something. A silence that seemed to scream inside him. It tore apart any remaining hope. But even without strength, he knew he had to make decisions. After all, this chaos was now part of his life, and pretending it was a nightmare wouldn't change anything. Late in the afternoon, he took a deep breath and decided to reach out to the kids. He couldn't imagine they didn't even know what had happened. He sent messages, tried calling, and when he finally managed to talk to Megan, the blow hit even harder. She answered dryly, coldly, distantly. She said she knew about the situation, but it was his fault. She simply threw it in his face that if Vanessa did what she did, it was because he had always been absent, cold, and more concerned with work than with his own family. Words that pierced his chest like a blade. And deep down, he knew this wasn't coming from her. This came from everything Vanessa had poisoned in the kids' minds. He tried to argue, tried to make Megan understand that it didn't make sense, that he had always been present, always done everything for that family. But it was like talking to a wall. On the other side, he only heard accusations, judgments, criticisms, as if, overnight, he had become a stranger, someone despicable, someone who was never good enough. The same situation repeated itself with Blake. Even though he was younger, he seemed to have memorized the exact same lines. As if they had been prepared for it. Derek hung up the phone in pieces. What was happening was worse than any nightmare. Vanessa hadn't just destroyed a marriage. She had destroyed an entire family. And that hurt much more than any betrayal. He spent days locked up, in shock, processing every word, every rejection, trying to understand if there was ever a time when he was truly loved by those people who now spat hateful words in his face that he never imagined hearing. But as the days went by, the pain began to turn into anger. He couldn't accept being painted as the villain. He couldn't accept that an entire history of dedication was being reduced to lies constructed by someone so deceitful. And that's when he decided to react. He began gathering documents, evidence, payment records, old messages, everything that could show who he really was within that house. He consulted lawyers, understood his rights, and prepared for what would be the toughest battle of his entire life. Meanwhile, Vanessa continued playing her game. On social media, she posted smiling pictures, pretending everything was fine, as if nothing had happened. Pretending to be the perfect mother, the warrior woman, the wife betrayed by a cold, absent, and insensitive man. And to Derek's surprise, many people believed this version. Her friends, relatives, even people close to him started distancing themselves, as if he were, indeed, that terrible man she described. It was as if, suddenly, he had become a monster that never existed. The divorce hearing was scheduled. And if he thought it would just be the end of a marriage, he was completely wrong. It was there that he realized Vanessa was willing to go much further than he imagined. She asked for the house, demanded an absurd amount of alimony, wanted the cars, the savings, and, as if that weren't enough, demanded full custody of the children. She claimed he wasn't emotionally capable of being a father, that he had always been absent, that he had never been a good example, and that the children were better off away from him. Derek listened to all of this in silence, holding back as much as possible to avoid exploding. But inside, he was shattered. It was as if every word she said was another stab. And the worst part was seeing that Megan and Blake were there, on her side, confirming everything. As if he were, indeed, a stranger, an intruder, someone who didn't belong to that family. The pain he felt that day was indescribable. A pain that can't compare to anything else. And for the first time, he felt something he never imagined feeling, the sensation of being completely disposable. In the days that followed, Derek realized that insisting on maintaining any ties in that scenario would only prolong the suffering. So he made a drastic decision. He sold what he could, quit his job, transferred his position to another branch in a distant city, and left. Without looking back, without warning, without leaving a trace. He packed what was left of his dignity and walked away. He needed to start over. He needed to rebuild himself. Because there, in that place, in that environment, in that scenario, only ruins remained. Upon arriving in the new city, he decided he didn't want to hear from anyone anymore. He shut himself off. Cut off all contact with the past. He became a cold, distant, dry man. He focused all his energy on work, leaving no room for friendships, relationships, or connections. Everything he once believed in, about love, family, and loyalty, had died. And inside him, only one certainty remained: from then on, he would never allow anyone to hurt him that way again. 7 years had passed since the day Derek left everything behind. 7 years where he rebuilt his life from scratch, in a city where no one knew his past, his scars, or his ghosts. And even though his heart had been broken in ways that seemed irreparable, life, in a very unexpected way, placed someone in his path capable of healing wounds he believed were incurable. Olivia appeared without him even looking. A strong woman, generous, with a lightness that contrasted with all the pain he carried. Someone who also had her own traumas, her own battles, but who saw more in him than just the wounds left by the past. At first, he resisted. He tried to push her away in every way. He avoided conversations outside of work, refused invitations, locked himself in his own world as if believing love was a trap he never wanted to be part of again. But Olivia was different. She didn't insist, didn't force it. She was simply there. Present, attentive, with a patience that, little by little, dismantled every defense he had built. And when he realized it, he was smiling without noticing. He missed her without wanting to admit it. And when he realized, he was completely in love. Their relationship grew with a naturalness he never imagined experiencing again. And a few years later, their love was crowned with the arrival of Chloe, a girl who brought Derek a kind of love he had never experienced. Taking care of that child, watching her grow, hearing her call him Dad, brought back a part of him that he thought had died. For the first time in many years, he felt like he was exactly where he should be. He had a wife who truly loved him, a daughter who was the light of his life, a house full of love, and a home that, now, finally made sense. And it was just when everything seemed finally peaceful that, on an ordinary afternoon, his phone rang. An unknown number. For a second, he thought about ignoring it, but something inside him made him answer. And on the other end of the line, a voice he knew very well. Megan. The daughter he hadn't seen, hadn't spoken to, hadn't heard from since the day he decided to leave and start his life over. Her voice was shaky, nervous, insecure. There was a heavy silence between each word, as if she were trying to gather the courage to say what she needed to say. And when she finally managed to speak, she said something that made his heart race in a way it hadn't in a long time. She said she was about to get married. And that, if he accepted, she wanted him to walk her down the aisle. For a few seconds, Derek didn't know what to say. It was as if the entire world had stopped around him. The man who learned to live without looking back, who got used to absence, who built an entire life without expecting anything more from the past, was now there, listening to his own daughter ask for something he never imagined she would even want. He took a deep breath, and before he could respond, Megan started crying. She said she was sorry, that she now understood everything, that she had been manipulated, that she grew up hearing lies, that she believed things that, today, she knows were never true. That she had spent years carrying resentment that, deep down, should never have existed. And that, more than a request to walk her down the aisle, this was a plea for forgiveness. A plea for them to somehow reconnect. Derek stayed silent. Part of him wanted to say yes immediately, hug her, forget everything, and simply be her father again. But another part remembered everything he had lived through, everything he had suffered, the wounds that were still there, open, throbbing. But deep down, he knew that the love he always felt for his children never ceased to exist. It was dormant, hurt, hidden, but it never disappeared. And then, with a choked voice, he replied that yes, he would accept. But that, before the wedding, they needed to talk, to clarify everything, to let out everything that had been stuck for all those years. A few days later, another surprise. Blake, the youngest son, also reached out to him. And just like Megan, he too carried regrets. He too had realized, over the years, that the version of the story he grew up hearing wasn't true. He said he spent a lot of time trying to understand why his father had simply disappeared, until he realized that, in fact, his father had been forced to leave. That he fled to survive, to keep from going insane. And that now, he wanted to recover what had once been lost. That reconnection was something Derek never imagined he would experience again. Little by little, they talked, understood each other, cried, hugged, and most importantly, forgave each other. Olivia, who had always known the story, welcomed Megan and Blake with an open heart. Chloe, who until then only knew she had two older siblings who lived somewhere in her father's past, now met them personally. And to everyone's surprise, that connection happened in such a natural, sincere way that it felt like they had never been apart. The day of Megan's wedding arrived. Derek was nervous. As much as the conversations had happened, as emotional as the reunions had been, nothing compared to what he was about to experience. It was a mix of pride, love, fear, and gratitude. And in the middle of all this, a strong feeling that, despite everything, he was exactly where he should be. The moment Megan appeared, dressed in her wedding gown, holding the bouquet, walking toward him, was simply indescribable. She was beautiful, her eyes filled with tears, holding back the sobs, and when they met, they hugged as father and daughter who, despite everything, always were. In that hug, it felt like all the time had condensed into that one moment. Every pain, every grudge, every tear, every absence, every sleepless night dissolved right there. As they walked together toward the altar, glances crossed, smiles were exchanged, tears flowed from the eyes of many present. But in the middle of that atmosphere of love and reconciliation, something unexpected happened. Suddenly, among the guests, a presence no one expected appeared. Vanessa. She showed up as if she still thought she had some kind of power, control, or influence. She entered with her head held high, with that old air of superiority, as if she could still cause some kind of discomfort. But what she found was exactly the opposite of what she might have imagined. No one stopped to look, no one was shaken, no one even stood up to ask what she was doing there. Megan, upon noticing her presence, looked directly into her mother's eyes and, with all the confidence in the world, simply said, "You don't belong here. You made your choice, and we made ours." Vanessa was speechless. For the first time, she seemed not to know what to do. She looked at her children, who didn't even return her gaze. She looked at Derek, who remained with a firm posture, holding his daughter's hand, showing that, there, she had no more power, no importance, no relevance. She tried to say something, tried to justify her presence, but Megan was direct. She said that this was her day, that this moment belonged to those who truly contributed to building her life. And that if Vanessa still had any respect for her, she should leave. With no way out, embarrassed, ashamed, she simply turned around and left, perhaps realizing for the first time that the control she once thought she had over that family, simply no longer existed. The ceremony continued, with even more emotion, with even more love, with even more meaning. Because on that day, everyone there understood one clear thing: love, loyalty, respect, and forgiveness will always be stronger than any lie. And when a family is built on truth, neither time, nor pain, nor anyone can destroy it. A few weeks passed after Megan's wedding. Life seemed to have finally found the balance Derek had been seeking. The reunion with his children had filled spaces within him that he believed would never be filled again. Until Derek's phone rang in the middle of the afternoon. When he saw Blake's name on the screen, he answered immediately. His son's voice sounded different. Sad, heavy, weighed down by something he couldn't quite identify. Blake got straight to the point. He said he really needed to talk, but it had to be in person, face to face. Derek became worried, tried to understand what it was about, but Blake only repeated that it couldn't be discussed over the phone. He said he was on his way, and that it was serious. While driving to meet him, Blake's mind kept replaying one scene. Hours earlier, unnoticed by anyone, he had passed by his mother's room and overheard, by chance, a conversation he never imagined he'd hear in his life. Vanessa was on the phone, talking to a friend, and between laughs and malicious comments, she let slip something that made Blake's world simply collapse. She said, in clear words, that she had always had doubts about whether Blake was really Derek's son. That, at the time, she had gotten involved with another man, and that, to this day, that doubt lingered, but she preferred to keep it hidden, tucked away, as if it were something unimportant. Blake froze. It hit him like a punch to the stomach. He was in shock, listening to every word, until, unable to hold back, he abruptly entered the room. Vanessa turned pale. She froze instantly. She tried to hang up the phone quickly, pretending it was a joke, that she was just saying nonsense, laughing, making up stories. But Blake didn't believe her. He stared her in the eyes and, for the first time in his life, spoke with a firmness he didn't know he had. He asked if it was true. He asked if she had lied her entire life. And, unable to give a convincing answer, Vanessa stuttered, avoided his gaze, tried to play it off, tried to laugh as if it were a tasteless joke. But at that moment, there was no more room for jokes or lies. Blake left the house completely distraught. He got in the car and thought of only one thing: finding his father. Because if there was one person in the world he needed to talk to at that moment, it was Derek. When he arrived, Derek immediately realized something was very wrong. His son was pale, his eyes full of tears, holding a whirlwind of emotions that seemed ready to explode. Blake took a deep breath and told him everything, hiding nothing. He recounted exactly what he heard, word for word. And upon hearing it, Derek felt his world collapse again. It was as if a wound he thought had healed was brutally ripped open. A deep, cutting, suffocating pain. But even with his chest tight, he held back his emotions, looked into his son's eyes, and, before any thought could take over, spoke without hesitation: "Yes, you are my son. You always have been and always will be. This has never been in question for me, and never will be." But Blake was too shaken. Even hearing that, even knowing his father's love, he felt he needed answers, needed something concrete, something to end this anguish. And then he said he wanted to take a DNA test. Derek, without thinking, replied that there was no need, that it was unnecessary, that he didn't need to prove anything because nothing would change what they were. But Blake insisted. He said he needed it, that only then would he be able to understand everything he was feeling, that this wasn't about love, it was about clarity, about facing a ghost that was now part of his life. Faced with his son's insistence, Derek took a deep breath, held Blake's hands, and responded that if it would bring peace, then they would do it. And so they did. They went to the lab together. They filled out forms, collected samples, and left carrying the weight of waiting through the longest days of their lives. Each passing day felt like a month. The anxiety, the fear, the insecurity, all mixed together. But at the same time, Derek continued his routine calmly. He was determined. No paper, no test, no confirmation would have the power to change what he felt for the son he had raised, cared for, educated, and loved since the first day of his life. When the results were ready, they opened them together. And there it was. What they both suspected deep down was now written, sealed, indisputable. Derek was not, biologically, Blake's father. The confirmation hit like a bomb. Blake broke down. He cried like never before. It was as if, all at once, the foundation he believed in had crumbled. The pain was suffocating. But before he could drown in that sea of suffering, Derek pulled him into a tight, unconditional hug, and with a choked voice, said, "This changes absolutely nothing. You are my son. You always have been. You always will be. And nothing, absolutely nothing, will change that. Not this paper, not the past, not anyone." At that moment, Blake finally understood the true meaning of family. And from then on, a new chapter of life began. Weeks passed, and the bond between them grew even stronger. Megan, along with her husband, made a decision that surprised and, at the same time, moved everyone. They decided to move to the city where Derek lived because, more than ever, they realized life is too short to live far from those who truly matter. Blake, now more mature, more confident, rented an apartment just a few blocks from his father's house. He wanted to be close, to build a life forward where love, respect, and truth were the only foundations. And since then, weekends became sacred. Family gatherings, barbecues, laughter, endless conversations, games, tight hugs. Chloe grew up surrounded by siblings who love her, a present father, an incredible mother, and a home overflowing with love. As for Vanessa, she was alone. Surrounded only by her own choices, her own mistakes, and the loneliness she had built for herself. Because life has a very precise way of returning everything you give to the world. And in the end, whoever plants lies, reaps emptiness. Whoever plants pain, reaps solitude. And whoever plants love, reaps exactly what Derek, Olivia, Megan, Blake, and Chloe live today, a full life, full of love, complicity, and peace.
Suspicious of your wife or daughter-in-law? Don't go through what we saw in the video. Check the link in the comments and get the ebook with valuable tips and investigator-approved sites to clear your doubts.
Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.
Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Brandon was never the type to fall in love easily. In fact, he had always been cautious with his feelings. He had experienced a few disappointments and knew how the excitement of the beginning could turn into frustration by the end. But when he met Haley, everything was different. It was as if time had stopped just so he could observe every gesture she made. Her smile, the way she played with her hair when she was nervous, the direct way she spoke her mind without considering others' reactions, it all affected him in a way that surprised him. And the more he got to know her, the more involved he felt. If other stories had made him hesitate, this one made him run. He started slowly. He would send her messages for no reason, just to let her know he was thinking about her. One day, he showed up at her door with a book she mentioned reading in her teens. Another time, he prepared a basket with her favorite foods and brought it to her workplace so she wouldn't have to eat alone. What surprised everyone the most was that he never expected anything in return. He did it because he wanted to. Because deep down, he wanted her to know she was special. Even on days when she seemed distant, he persisted. When she said she was tired of everything, he listened patiently, holding her hand until the silence became comfortable. Haley, at first, thought all of this was over the top. She came from a troubled relationship full of empty promises and disappointments. She didn't want to create expectations. But over time, she realized there was something about Brandon that was different. He didn't need to say all the time that he loved her because his actions shouted it. When she got sick and couldn't get out of bed, he stayed by her side for 3 whole days, even though he had important commitments. He canceled everything. He said she came first. Haley was shocked by that level of dedication. No one had ever placed her at the center of everything like that. The dating request wasn't with flowers or speeches. It was with sincerity. He looked her in the eyes and said, "If you let me stay, I promise to make you feel safe. And if I ever fail, I'll try again and again." She cried. And accepted. From that day on, their lives transformed. They bought a simple house but filled it with plans. They painted the walls together, messing up the colors, laughing at the mess. They built memories as the days passed, and soon came the wedding. It was intimate, only with those who truly mattered. Brandon seemed unable to stop smiling. During the vows, he promised to be by her side even during phases when love wasn't obvious and that he'd fight every day to ensure she never felt alone again. Their first child was born a year later. Brandon was the kind of father who woke up in the middle of the night to warm up the bottle and sing songs quietly, even though he couldn't sing. He held the baby so Haley could rest, even after an exhausting day at work. He didn't divide tasks, he took them on as if every part of the routine was as much his responsibility as hers. 2 years later, their second daughter arrived. And the family felt complete. They took photos, went on picnics, celebrated simple dates with homemade cakes and drawings on the walls. Brandon loved to document everything, as if wanting to preserve each little piece of that happiness. But time, as it always does, began to alter the rhythm of things. Work demanded more, exhaustion weighed heavily, and the two started losing some of the connection that had once been so natural. But Brandon kept trying. He bought tickets to shows she liked, even though he didn't enjoy the bands that much. He prepared dinners when she said the day had been tough. He took the kids out for walks just so she could have some time to herself. And still, despite all these gestures, a void began to grow between them. He felt something was off but thought it was just the accumulation of routine. Until that night. Haley seemed strange, her gaze distant, as if she were somewhere else. Brandon felt a tightness in his chest, as if sensing what was coming. She sat on the couch, held a pillow tightly, took a few deep breaths, and then said it. Just a few words. And they were enough to bring everything crashing down. I got involved with someone else. She said it was impulsive, that it didn't mean anything, that she felt suffocated. That it shouldn't have happened. But for Brandon, it meant everything. Because it dismantled the story he believed he had built with so much effort, so much love, so much care. He stayed silent. He got up, went to the bedroom, grabbed a pillow and a blanket, came back to the living room, and handed them to her. You sleep in the guest room. He said it calmly, without shouting, without crying. But inside him, something had broken. From that night on, every gesture that had once been filled with affection turned into distance. And even though she apologized, even though she cried, even though she tried to explain, he could no longer listen with the same heart as before. The betrayal, for him, wasn't just about the act. It was about everything it represented. About how much he believed he was enough. About how much he gave himself, believing he was building something solid. And now, faced with that reality, Brandon could only think of one thing: how can someone destroy so much, even after receiving everything? That night destroyed more than just a promise. Haley curled up on the mattress in the guest room as if that could push away the guilt that was crushing her. She knew Brandon had taken the news like a blunt blow. His lack of reaction was more terrifying than any scream. In his silence, there was a contained cry, a stifled pain, a disappointment spreading through every corner of the house like a crack no one knew how to fix. The next morning, Haley woke up early. She prepared breakfast for the kids and waited for some gesture, any sign that said there was still something to save. Brandon came down the stairs, poured his coffee, and said good morning without looking up. It was the first time she felt invisible in her own home. Later that afternoon, with a heavy heart, she took paper and pen and wrote a letter. She wrote as if pouring out her soul. She told everything, the regret, the shame, the reasons she herself was still trying to understand. She didn't justify the mistake, but she tried to explain how she got there. She folded the letter carefully and left it on his pillow, taking a deep breath before leaving the room. When she returned later, the letter was still there. Untouched. That broke her. She thought about taking it back but decided to leave it. If he wanted to, he would read it. If he ignored it, that would be another answer. The next morning, while tidying up the kids' room, she passed by his bedroom door and saw the letter was gone. The pillow was smooth, as if no one had slept there. She felt her chest tighten. He had read it. Or at least, he had touched it. And that, as small as it was something. That night, she found the letter folded again, but now on the living room table. On top of it, a note with just 2 words, I read it. That was enough to make Haley cry in the bathroom for almost an hour. Brandon had read it. He knew everything. But still, he chose to keep his distance. In the days that followed, she tried to hold on to whatever she could. She requested a transfer at work, completely distanced herself from the coworker involved, ignored messages, blocked numbers, changed her routine. She wanted to show with actions that she was still worth it. Brandon noticed. But he didn't react. The only thing that changed was that he started coming home later from work, as if trying to stay out of the house as much as possible. Haley then began planning every gesture carefully. She prepared his favorite dishes, left small affectionate notes, organized the house details the way he liked them. But the responses were dry. An okay, a nod, a change of subject. It was like living with someone who had already said goodbye but stayed out of obligation. The most painful part was realizing that he cared for the kids with the same tenderness as always. He smiled with them, played, was present. But when he crossed paths with her, it was like walking through an empty street. The absence of words, touch, eye contact felt like being dead while still alive. And she felt it every second. She suggested couples therapy. He agreed but made it clear, I'm doing this for the kids. In the first session, Haley opened up. She talked about how she felt before the betrayal, how the routine had swallowed the woman she once was. She spoke about emotional exhaustion, suffocating loneliness, the constant feeling that no one saw her. She said she made a mistake trying to find outside what was hurting inside. The therapist listened. So did Brandon. But at the end of the session, he simply said, "That doesn't change what you did." The sentence fell like a verdict. And even so, she went home with him, sitting in the car as if accepting punishment for something she couldn't fix. The sessions continued. Haley tried to piece things back together, even though it was cutting her fingers. She prepared a special night with old photos of them, music that marked the start of their relationship, a simple cake with his favorite flavor. Brandon came home, looked at the table, and said, "I'm not hungry." He went upstairs and locked the door. She blew out the candles one by one and put away what was left. Then she sat on the couch and stayed there until morning, asking herself if there was still any part of him worth fighting for. And even though she was hurt, her internal answer was still yes. But little by little, her gestures began to be avoided. Hugs bumped into crossed arms. Conversations were limited to the necessary. When she suggested something, he responded with short phrases. When she tried to show affection, he pulled back. The letter that once represented a chance to start over became just another reminder that he had already begun to say goodbye. And now, she was starting to realize that maybe she was fighting alone against something that could only be overcome together. At this point, Haley began living between guilt and attempts. She left the house earlier, came back later, left the kids with their grandparents on some weekends to see if creating space might open a crack between them. But what grew was the silence. And this silence, now, had a name, a story, a weight. And no matter how tightly she held on to everything she still felt, the sensation was that love was trapped in a place where Brandon no longer lived. After months of trying to sustain a relationship that had already crumbled inside, Haley proposed a trip. It was her last attempt. She suggested Hawaii, the place where they spent their honeymoon. She thought that maybe revisiting that scene could reignite something in Brandon. When she told him, she expected rejection, but he simply said they could look at flights. No enthusiasm, no opinion. She understood that he was only going because he felt obligated. She organized everything carefully. She asked Brandon's parents to take care of the kids and planned the trip as a return to the past. She booked the same hotel, chose the same tours, and brought the dress she wore when they first confessed their love. Brandon was polite upon arrival. He picked up the bags, thanked her, and looked at the ocean without emotion. On the way to the hotel, she tried to start conversations, but he responded with short phrases or nods. On the first night, Haley realized, he was only physically present. They repeated the activities from before. They visited the same tourist spots, smiled for others, but between them, there was no connection. Brandon followed the itinerary, participated, but it was as if he were absent. Haley, even so, kept trying. She scheduled a boat ride at sunset. It was the same one from years ago. They sat side by side. She talked about the kids, about how fast they were growing. He responded without emotion. When she leaned her shoulder against his, he stayed still. He didn't pull away, but he didn't react either. Later, she invited him for a walk. They stopped where they once made plans for the future. Haley asked if he believed in fresh starts. He stayed silent for a few seconds, then said that sometimes we try to relive something that no longer exists. She hugged him. He hugged back. and kissed her. But the kiss was different. Without surrender, without urgency. It felt like a goodbye. That night, they slept together. But even in that intimate moment, Haley felt that he avoided looking into her eyes. She realized he pretended involvement while pulling away inside. The next morning, Brandon went for a run. When he returned, Haley waited for him with coffee. They sat together and drank in silence. He didn't mention the night before. He finished, got up, and went to take a shower. The rest of the day passed like a repeated script, without emotion, without reaction. On the last night, Haley prepared dinner in the room. She ordered his favorite dish, played the song from their wedding. Brandon walked in, looked at everything, and said, "You've always been good at setting these things up." During dinner, they talked about light topics. At the end, she approached and asked if he still felt anything. He thought for a few seconds and replied, "Last night, I closed my eyes because if I looked at you, I'd see his face. I tried. But there are images that stick. And that was it." She stayed quiet. That hurt more than any direct response. It was confirmation that he couldn't move forward. She cleared the dishes, blew out the candles, turned off the music. He went to take a shower. Haley stood in front of the mirror, looking at herself and realizing she had lost everything while trying to recover something that no longer existed. On the flight back, Haley looked out the window, holding back tears. She finally understood that no matter how hard she had tried, some wounds time cannot heal. And that some bonds, even with love, cannot withstand breaking. After the trip, everything became even colder. The attempt to rebuild only confirmed what was already clear: the bond between them no longer existed. Haley noticed that Brandon came home later, went out on weekends under the excuse of work events, and smiled more often outside the house than inside. She observed every change closely, trying to understand what was happening. Until one name started appearing frequently in his conversations with the kids: Nicole. First as a colleague. Then as someone fun. Someone who got his jokes, who liked the same shows, who knew how to listen. The way he talked about her was different. There was a sparkle in his eyes. Haley noticed it one afternoon when he told the kids that Nicole also had 2 dogs and that they had played in the park during a company event. This wasn't just casual conversation. It was closeness. The difference was in the small things: the way he smiled, the enthusiasm in his voice. At home, that sparkle hadn't been there for a long time. And Haley felt the pain of being replaced, even though Brandon hadn't said anything directly. It was a silent exclusion. One Sunday afternoon, he took the kids out for lunch and took a picture with them, which Nicole posted on social media. Haley saw it because a mutual friend tagged her. In the photo, he smiled in a way she hadn't seen since before the betrayal. The kids were happy, hugging, and Nicole appeared in the background, sort of on purpose, smiling too. Haley didn't say anything. But she felt everything. It crushed her subtly. She started locking herself in the bedroom more often. She avoided his usual hours. When he came home, she was already in bed. When she woke up, he had already left. That night, after putting the kids to bed, she came downstairs and found Brandon on his phone, laughing. When he noticed her presence, he put the phone away. She didn't ask anything. She went to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, took a deep breath, and returned. She stood at the door for a few seconds before saying, in a low voice, almost a whisper, "You seem happier when you're away from me." He didn't respond. He just looked at her. She continued, "I still love you. But loving someone who doesn't love you back is a daily defeat." Brandon swallowed hard but stayed silent. She then added, "I don't want our kids to grow up in a home where love has become a memory. I want them to see you smiling. Even if that smile isn't with me anymore." That's when she asked for a divorce. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She just informed him. And for the first time since the confession months ago, Brandon looked up and stared at her. After a few seconds, he said, "If that's how you feel, I understand." She just nodded and went upstairs. That night, she slept soundly for the first time in a long while. The following days were organized practically. They divided responsibilities, discussed legal details, informed their families. The kids were the only ones who immediately felt the impact. They asked if their dad was leaving. Haley explained carefully that things would change, but both would remain present. Brandon reinforced this as well. At no point was there an argument. It was as if, in that silence between them, there was an invisible agreement of maturity. Everything seemed to follow a predictable path until, a few weeks later, Haley felt unwell. Daily nausea, dizziness. She thought it was anxiety or the stress of the divorce but decided to get tested. When she got the results, she had confirmation, she was pregnant. The impact was immediate. Based on the timeline, the weeks matched the night they spent together in Hawaii. Her heart raced. She didn't know if this was punishment, a chance, or just another twist in a cycle that refused to end. She thought about keeping it a secret. She thought about leaving town. She thought about everything. But that wasn't the kind of woman she wanted to be. She set up a coffee meeting with Brandon and, when he arrived, handed him the envelope with the test results. He opened it, read it calmly, and stayed silent for a few minutes. Then he looked up and said, "It's mine, right?" She confirmed. And he just took a deep breath and replied, "We'll handle this together." For the first time in months, he held her hand. Not as a husband, but as a father. Haley didn't know what this meant in the long term. But she felt that, even apart, there was still respect. A care that endured, despite everything. The pregnancy progressed with regular checkups. Brandon remained present. He helped with the kids, took Haley to appointments, and followed the tests. There was no romance between them, but there was presence. When the baby was born, he was there. He cried when he saw him for the first time. Haley cried too. For different reasons. He cried for the son. She cried for everything that had been, for what they had tried to be, and for what they already knew would never be again. Their story came to an end without fights but full of marks. Brandon moved to a nearby apartment. He spent time with the kids, with the baby, and built a new routine. Haley continued with hers. She helped the kids with school, took care of the new baby, and gradually rediscovered her strength. The love between them turned into something else. It became care, respect, a permanent bond because of the children. But the marriage ended there. Without scandal, without complete forgiveness, without going back. Only after a long time did Haley understand that the greatest act of love she could still offer was to free Brandon from all of it. And that sometimes, when you love someone, the hardest thing isn't to fight. It's to let go. And allow each person to carry the scars they choose to bear.
Suspicious of your wife or daughter-in-law? Don't go through what we saw in the video. Check the link in the comments and get the ebook with valuable tips and investigator-approved sites to clear your doubts.
Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.